Hello, and thank you for joining the Family Office Network's webinar series featuring Psy. Presenting for us today is David Barlow and Alan Cross. David Barlow is Chair and CEO of Psy Therapeutics. He brings over 40 years of experience building and transitioning biopharma companies at all stages of development, from startup to fully integrated commercial, domestic, and global biopharmaceutical corporations. Under his leadership, several biopharmaceuticals were developed and commercialized, delivering significant value for patients and billions for investors. Alan Cross, also joining us today, is Chief Scientific Officer and Chair of the Scientific Advisory Board at Psy, where he is responsible for leading Psy's scientific research programs and developing research capabilities and collaborations. Alan brings more than 40 years of experience in neuropsychiatric research, drug discovery, and development in the industry, academic, and advisory roles. As always, at the end of today's presentation, we have time for Q&A. We encourage your questions, so please submit them by using your questions chat option on the right side of your screen. And with that said, gentlemen, I'm going to let you get started.
Great, thanks a lot, Lindsay, and thanks to you and the FON Network for inviting us to this webinar. It's great to see you again, and we look forward to sharing our novel approach to tackling a seemingly intractable challenge, which is Alzheimer's disease. We also want to thank all those who are joining us today at this time, and those who may view this presentation through the FON library at a later date. So, Psy Therapeutics is focused on a very consequential mission, which is to develop, we're committed to discovering and developing innovative medicines which meaningfully improve the lives of people affected by psychiatric disorders and also dementia. Now, today's presentation will focus on the dementia component of our portfolio. However, we'll apply our overall company method to this wonderful effort. The method begins with a world-class team. Now, many of you may see this on every presentation. We like to say it has the added benefit of not only being a world-class team of scientists and clinicians, but most importantly, these team members are actively engaged in both the development of the strategies and the executions of the plan. So that's a huge benefit to Psy as we address large markets with significant unmet medical needs. And we're doing this by way of an innovative R&D approach which enhances productivity. And this productivity dynamic is not just limited to doing it faster and less expensively. It's primarily driven by the outcome, which is the discovery and development of superior molecules, which truly do change people's lives. And in the area of mental illness and mental health, as many of us know, it's not only the patients, it's the many people surrounding them and their families, most importantly. This approach is driving our robust, focused, and risk-balanced pipeline. Alan and I both come from long histories of focusing on pipeline companies, and this helps us make extremely good decisions and also mitigates overall scientific and business risk. The pipeline is then driving both near-term and longer-term value-creating milestones with a compelling future, not only in the immediate term, but longer term, and we'll talk about that toward the end of the presentation. We're also highly experienced in monetizing these assets and have multiple options to do so. Let's begin with the team, which in over 40 years of being in biopharma, well, I would have to say that this is of paramount importance. I'll just give you a very quick addition to Lindsay's generous bio introduction. In over 40 years within biopharma, I have had the privilege of leading extremely talented teams of people who have developed meaningfully improved therapies for patients, and that translates in this business to substantial returns for those who supported us at all levels of the risk continuum. And so this is a continuation of that effort. My experience in neuroscience actually began around 2000 when I was invited to join the board of McLean Hospital, among the very top, if not the top psychiatric hospital in the world, and also the centerpiece of the Harvard psychiatry offerings, which includes MGH. And so from that experience, I really was captivated by the promise and the challenges ahead for neuroscience, and it's an extremely exciting place to be. I had made a commitment, long-term commitment, to focus on advancing mental health from a philanthropic and also service standpoint. However, I've added the third leg of the stool, and that is now returning to the company building privilege through Psy Therapeutics, as it's all consistent with focus on advancing mental health. Alan, as Lindsay mentioned, has a tremendous background as a neuroscientist in big pharma and also in the academic settings, and he's a noted advisor at the NIH. So he brings a wealth of talent, experience, common sense, wisdom, innovation, and plus he's a great guy to work with. So we're blessed that Alan has joined the team. He'll go into our program, our Tau Alzheimer's program, in more detail in a few slides. And also note a little bit more about his background. We're also extremely fortunate to have two co-founders who are near legendary in the field of neuropsychiatry. Dr. Jerry Rosenbaum was the leader in the building of Massachusetts General Department of Psychiatry, perennially the leader, if not among the leaders in the US and the world. And Jerry, as a co-founder, recently retired from MGH and is now a board member and is working on a daily basis with Psy. Mauricio Fava, equally recognized within the neuropsychiatric field, has assumed the role of now chair of the Department of Psychiatry at MGH, and he's also a fantastic resource for us, who also is involved on a near daily basis in the crafting of strategies and executing them. So these are cornerstone team members. There are many others that you'll get familiar with as you get to know Psy more. All of them would be wide open to having discussions with you. It's a transparent operation, and we want you to get to know Psy as well as possible. And these leaders are at the ready to share their views of the company. So the pipeline, which I mentioned earlier, we have a focus on depression and anxiety, and I would encourage you to review the presentation, the FON presentation that we made on December 9th of 2020, which goes into our overall company platform and technology and pipeline in more detail. However, for this presentation, we wanted to focus on the Alzheimer's program, the Tau program. So we're a pipeline company, highly focused in the area of psychiatric disorders and dementia, and today we're sharing with you the Alzheimer's program. So as we all know, Alzheimer's disease is an expanding threat severely impacting patients and families. And many of us on the line today and beyond have experienced that directly. Alzheimer's devastates 6 million plus adults in the US alone. And with those patients, there are many additional people affected by Alzheimer's. As you know, it's the leading form of dementia, and dementia is a broad-based term for memory loss. And its most significant symptoms are progressive memory loss, cognitive decline, and also behavioral and language major challenges. So it's a big deal. And Alzheimer's, this is really interesting. It's the only leading cause of death that cannot be prevented, slowed, or cured by therapeutic intervention at this stage. So the challenge is clear, and the sense of urgency to move forward in addressing this large, growing, and underserved patient population is pronounced. Currently, 1 in 9 in the US are suffering from diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And as you can see the curve on the right, this is just a simple demographic driven curve. which underscores huge challenges for not only patients and families, but also society at large. We need to reverse this trend, and that's what we're here to do. So I think we all get a sense for the sense of urgency to innovate in this field and to design, discover, and develop compounds which prevent and slow disease progression. Currently, there are none. So the first line therapy is certainly on trying to maintain the mental function. As we move to moderate dementia, the second line treatments are trying to address psychiatric and behavioral challenges, but unfortunately, this too is poorly managed. And the inevitable severe depression in the third phase requires enormous additional care by paid, unpaid, and family caregivers. The symptoms worsen, and the challenge is clear. So we understand and are committed to the obvious, which it's clearly time for safe and effective therapies for Alzheimer's disease. And we're really interested, excited in sharing with you the program that we have at hand to get that started and to make that happen. So to do that, I'm going to ask Alan to return and also share a little bit about his background and also the program that we have at Psy. So Alan.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, just as background, I'm a neuroscientist by training. I was in academia in the UK. Have worked with small and large pharmaceutical companies in the UK, in Sweden, and the US. And throughout my career, I've been focused on discovering and developing drugs for neuropsychiatric illness. I spent 30 years with AstraZeneca, built the neuroscience organization in the US, was responsible for the preclinical and early development portfolio. And we had quite a successful time producing and delivering drugs into development, some of which are still in active development. You know, I've been interested or committed, if you like, to finding new ways to work around the drug discovery development arena to make things more flexible, more entrepreneurial, and to, of course, to improve the output there in terms of potential treatments. And part of that was building a virtual drug discovery unit as part of AstraZeneca in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and as a way of developing a new way of working. And when I left AstraZeneca and the Psy opportunity came along, this was a perfect way to continue that development of new ways of working and really try and be more productive in CNS drug discovery. So I'll talk a little bit around background on Alzheimer's and why we're interested in this approach to Alzheimer's disease based on a protein called tau. I'll talk a little bit then around how we've put together our organization in Psy Therapeutics, how we're working and how we're applying those ways of working to Alzheimer's disease. And then I'll talk specifically about the tau program that we're actively pursuing now and which is progressing very well. So as you know, Alzheimer's disease is progressive, degenerative disorder. You can see the degeneration in the brain as atrophy. This is not throughout the brain. It occurs in certain parts, mainly the cortex, which is involved in higher cognitive function. Under the microscope, you can see degenerating nerve cells, neurons, and associated with them some abnormal structures called neurofibrillary tangles and amyloid plaques. And these are the diagnostic hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. It's since been discovered that both of these are formed from abnormal protein aggregates, which are thought to be toxic. The plaques are extracellular, the tangles occur inside nerve cells. The plaques are formed from a protein beta amyloid, and the tangles are formed from a different protein called tau. And following on from this, pretty early on, it was discovered the pathway for amyloid, beta amyloid formation, and some links through genetics to familial forms of Alzheimer's disease, which are extremely rare. And for that reason, most of the drug discovery efforts in Alzheimer's disease focused on that beta amyloid protein, either trying to prevent it being formed or to remove it with various approaches. And there was a lot less interest in tau, even though it was known to be clearly associated with degenerating neurons. This is the way that large pharma tends to work. Everyone follows an initial lead. And around that beta amyloid hypothesis, that there has been an enormous investment. More than 20 billion invested in drug development, drug discovery and development around beta amyloid, but also around developing biomarkers and imaging tools, which help us to understand the progression of the illness and also hold the promise of an early predictive diagnosis. So in this graph here, this is a synopsis of what we've learned from these imaging and biomarker studies. And you can see here, the accumulation of beta amyloid plaques occurs very early. And by the time that symptoms are apparent, that process is pretty much complete. And what we've learned, I think, from the clinical studies trying to remove or prevent amyloid formation is you need to go early in the process. But even when you go early, the amyloid accumulation has proceeded to completion. And those approaches to treatment have not proven to be effective. And there are, of course, a few outstanding programs still out there, but the general consensus now of the field is this is certainly not going to solve Alzheimer's disease. You can see in the green line here, this is tau accumulation. And this is occurring somewhat later. It's still an active process when that early diagnosis based on cognitive impairment can be made. And so the idea here is that the tau accumulation is a more critical pathological event at the time of diagnosis, and hence will be a better target for a potential treatment of Alzheimer's disease. And these studies on biomarkers and imaging continue, and it's hopeful that they'll also contribute to not only the early diagnosis, but also the definition of particular subgroups of patients within the broad Alzheimer's disease indication that might be most appropriate for treatment. One other lesson I think that we've learned, and I'm certainly aware of during this process, is we must not lose sight on safety and tolerability. You know, we're treating elderly, often fragile patients, and any side effects, be they CNS or peripherally mediated, are going to impact on how people behave and perform. And I'm sure most of us are aware of elderly subjects who have an infection or some systemic illness, and it precipitates cognitive impairment and starts the process of dementia. And of course, as you go earlier in diagnosis, in trying to pick up the very early cases, you're basically looking to start treatment in essentially normal people. And again, safety and tolerability become paramount importance. So although we could say in some ways that investment has failed in terms of producing viable treatments, it certainly hasn't failed in teaching us how to address treatment strategies in Alzheimer's disease and where there may be better targets than beta amyloid. So obviously tau, being in that critical phase, has become a target of great interest. And we're learning a lot around the role of this protein in neurodegeneration. It's involved in Alzheimer's disease, but it's clearly involved in other smaller indications where tau accumulates. Some of them are listed here. And interestingly, some of these are defined genetically and involve a mutation in tau. And in those cases, we can be very clear. Tau is, or the mutation in tau, is the causative factor in those illnesses, which strengthens the case for tau being a good target for treatment. And we've learned that tau is involved in degenerative changes, and if we reverse the changes in tau, we can reduce the neurotoxicity and the downstream effects. So tau stands out as a very strong target for potential treatment of Alzheimer's. Now, I mentioned, the drive to find new ways of working in CNS drug discovery, and the way that we've built the Psy organization around those principles. And I'll just describe some of that very briefly. So Dave mentioned the SAB. You've been introduced to Jerry and Maurizio, who bring tremendous experience in early clinical studies, clinical trial design, plus very large academic, industry, biotech networks that we can tap into. Two other key members of our scientific team are Steve Haggerty, who is an expert in chemical biology, but specifically focused on tau, and then Jacob Hooker, who is a medicinal chemist. He runs our medicinal chemistry programs, but he also is a leader at the Martinos PET Imaging Center at MGH, and so has experience of using a lot of those imaging technologies and biomarkers that I described earlier that are involved in early diagnosis. And just to re-emphasize the point Dave made, these are working members of our team. These are not people that we're meeting once a year for a nice discussion and a game of golf. These people work intimately in our programs. They're invested in those programs, and we're meeting on certainly a weekly or monthly basis to go right into the progress of the projects. This outlines our process, and there are a couple of points I want to make here about how we're doing things somewhat differently. So we're built around two foundational collaborations. One is with a company called XChem, who have a particular expertise in a cutting-edge screening technology. So in our case, they will screen our targets for us against a library of 250 billion molecules. Now, obviously, that's a very large, the largest library. Because this is the sole focus of XChem, they've invested heavily in the chemistry there. And so it's not just large, it's very high quality. And we can certainly vouch for the validation of this approach. It gives us very good chemical starting points to initiate our drug discovery programs. The second collaboration is with a company called Intellicin. This is a chemical informatics company, and this allows us to do a lot of our work in silico. And the more that we can do in silico, the less we need to do in the wet lab, and the more efficient the whole process becomes. And being a virtual drug discovery organization, and I'll go into that in a little more detail in the next slide. Now that means that firstly, we can access the best technology, and secondly, we can integrate these into our process. So we can bring these technologies together without having to build a huge enterprise in-house and a large fixed cost-based investment. And then the third arm of this is, as I mentioned, as we go into human studies, we'll focus very much on using biomarkers, PET imaging, and with Jacob and his team there, that gives us a clear advantage. And with him in our early projects, we can start to build those tools and technologies very early on. So this is the core of our working method. As I said, we're a virtual organization, so we access the resource and technology that we need externally. We put a lot of effort into establishing partnerships and collaborations. We have everything that we need to get us through this value chain to human studies and clinical studies. And where we can, we prefer a collaboration rather than a fee for service. It gives us a much better outcome. And for some of these partners, we have FTEs on site working for us. So that's just a flavor for how we're working. And we've really, I think, validated that virtual drug discovery model, not just in terms of efficiency and effectiveness, but in terms of really, as Dave mentioned, producing superior drug candidate molecules. So now I'll go into a little more detail on our tau program, our first-in-class tau oligomerization inhibitor for the modification of the progression or the slowing of the progression of Alzheimer's disease. So this gives you, this cartoon gives you an outline of the process by which tau aggregates and accumulates in the brain and causes detrimental downstream consequences, which are basically a loss and death of neurons. So tau is it's an intracellular protein. It's present in neurons, and in Alzheimer's disease, it aggregates initially by producing these low molecular weight oligomers, 4 or 8 tau molecules aggregating together. These act as seeds for the aggregation of higher molecular weight aggregates, and these gradually accumulate within nerve cells, precipitate. They're insoluble, and they form what's been called neurofibrillary tangles. These are the things that are seen under the microscope, and these basically stop the neuron functioning. They basically fill the neuron with this protein aggregate. As the neurons die, tau protein is released from these neurons, and it can spread to other neurons, and it can cause an inflammatory response. Now, using the lessons that we've learned through the investment in Alzheimer's research and development, we know we need to go as early as possible in this process to prevent the aggregation. So we targeted these low molecular weight tau oligomers, which are outlined here. We were able to produce a preparation of tau at the oligomer stage that could be screened through the XChem screening process. It's important to remember that tau is an intracellular protein, and our approach using small molecules was designed to get those molecules inside the neuron. So we're really blocking the process at the very earliest stage. Most of our competitors are taking different approaches. So there's a lot of interest, and I'll show you this in the next slide, using biologic approaches, mainly monoclonal antibodies. And you can get monoclonal antibodies to enter the brain. It's not great, but it will happen. But you certainly can't get those monoclonal antibodies into neurons. So with that approach, you're not going to be getting early in the process, and you're really going to be limited to that late stage release of tau from neurons. There are one or two small molecule competitors, but these programs were designed to target the high molecular weight tau aggregates, and again, won't be going early enough in the process. So we feel with our approach, we're really getting early at the disease pathophysiological progression. We're intracellular, and we'll have a clear advantage over our competitors. Now, and this graphic just emphasizes that point. So you see in the bottom left-hand quadrant here, a whole range of companies with antibody approaches, a number of big players there. We recently heard that the AC Immune Genentech monoclonal antibody failed in its first clinical study, which was not a surprise to us at all. But some of those other programs, I'm sure, will continue. There is one biologic approach which does hold the promise of intracellular early activity, and that's a gene therapy-based approach from Ionis and Biogen. But this technology is incredibly risky, and I'm sure most of you have seen quite a number of high-profile failures of this type of approach in other CNS indications. Amongst the small molecule competitors, TauRx have a dye-like compound, which is very limited in the extent to which it can be dosed in humans. And again, certainly targets those high molecular weight aggregates, not the early ones that we target. AC Immune have a more interesting program in the sense that they clearly have compounds which can enter the cell, but again, they're targeting high molecular weight aggregates, not the early oligomers that we go. So as far as we see at the moment, we are in a very interesting competitive position, clearly separated from the majority of the competition, and with what we would say is a much more relevant approach to treating Alzheimer's disease through the tau pathway. Now, as I said, we ran a screen. We identified a series of small molecule tau inhibitors. We've confirmed in vitro cell-based systems that these molecules do indeed prevent tau aggregation. And we've been able to modify these compounds so that they have good drug-like properties. They enter the brain very well. And we're at the point now where, for us, the next step will be to run a preclinical proof of principle study using transgenic, genetically modified mouse models to study how effective our compounds are at blocking tau aggregation in vivo. And depending on the outcome of that, we'll certainly have a compelling data set that would be attractive to potential partners. We would be able to make a decision as to whether to continue to run the program internally or seek a partner at that point. And we should also get information on where we might go in our initial patient studies, because we will be studying some of those tau mutations that I mentioned earlier. And then, of course, we can move forward with minimal lead optimization into IND enabling studies. So to summarize, we have a highly innovative, first-in-class treatment, which is clearly differentiated and has a number of advantages over our competitors. We have the opportunity to go beyond Alzheimer's disease and treat some other illnesses which are associated with tau aggregation. And depending on how the data steers us, that may be the best way to go to gain an early and meaningful clinical signal in phase 2. There are, as Dave will go through, there are multiple options as to how we monetize this asset, and we've already seen a lot of corporate interest in these preclinical tau programs because of the strength of the potential for treating Alzheimer's disease. So with that, I'll hand you back to Dave, who'll continue the discussion around our Series A.
Thanks very much, Alan. Our Series A is underway, and it's part of our financing strategy, which combines both equity sources and also non-dilutive sources. We completed a seed round a couple of years ago, and that raised $4 million. And what you've seen, we've achieved under $4 million. I think that's giving some preliminary evidence that our productivity model is indeed working. The Series A that we have underway is targeting 30 million. And I'll talk in a minute about the use of funds and what kind of asset base we would hope to have at that point through that investment. But we did something interesting in the Series A. We carved out up to 4 million of the 30 million target for a convertible note, which would be priced at a discount to the final Series A price. And so we would encourage, this was done intentionally to target those individuals or firms that may not have the size necessary to participate in the Series A round, but they got the story, they want to be involved with Psy, and they can move quickly. This has provided us cash so that we continue our programs, and also the Series A round without worrying about running out of money. So I would encourage, and also we've had discussions about the convert with our Series A potential partners, and all of them agree it's the right thing to do. But as soon as the syndicate comes together, then the convert shuts down regardless of where it's at. So I'd encourage folks to consider the convert option. There is room at the end. We do not actively promote this, so I think it's important to note that that we've mentioned it with our short list of VC potential co-investors, and again, they say it's a good idea. But we do present it to select audiences, and thus far the folks who have participated are investors in the psychedelic space, and they understand we have a common interest in moving toward advancing mental health. We're not a psychedelic company, but our lead program does leverage the endocannabinoid system, the knowledge of that. And so that's a bit of a bridge, and that would be for both anxiety and pain. And that's a bit of a conceptual bridge for these folks. We are not discovering or developing THC knockoffs. It's an entirely different program. But that just gives you some flavor as to the flexibility of the Series A round. And in terms of the non-dilutive sources, it's a good time to be where we're at. There is our lead program 05 also has tremendous opportunity in the area of non-addictive pain relief. And so we've submitted a grant to NIH for this very purpose, $8 million grant. We have thus far received a good score, but a funding decision has not been made. But our plan intentionally is to submit several grant proposals. And we found also that there are several opportunities for Alzheimer's. And thus far, we've submitted 3 grants for both the pain indication for the 05 program and 2 tau-related programs. And these could be directed at both government agencies and also foundations who are particularly focused in these disease areas. So we would expect that by the end of this year, we would have 6 active grants under review and or decided upon. And what we do from a more conservative economic modeling standpoint is we don't include any grant-related monies into our financial planning. Once awarded those, then we would make adjustments and reallocations. But everything you'll see in terms of our expectations and budgets for our multiple programs has derived from the equity financing. Finally, corporate partnerships. Alan mentioned this earlier. Big Pharma has essentially, in large measure, outsourced the discovery, the innovation in CNS. There's still some major players in Big Pharma that are doing that type of work, but many have hit the pause button. However, the good news is that it's not because they don't see the potential. It's just a different business model. And they now have an appetite for collaborations with innovative companies such as ours at a much earlier stage than has historically been the standard. So that's one opportunity. And in addition, there's an exciting, and this kind of reflects somewhat of a renaissance in CNS innovation. There are a number of emerging or advancing neuropsychiatric companies that are now public, and they have market caps of 1 billion to 8 billion. Invariably, they need additional products to fuel their pipelines. So both groups have done proactive outreaches to us. But I have to underscore, we're not actively shopping any assets. Now is not the time to do that. I just present this as a flavor for the landscape in terms of how, our intention to, as one opportunity to monetize some of our assets. So the next slide gives you a snapshot of, this is our portfolio. And if you look in the first 2 rows, that's where significant value is created. Certainly up front, people understand the opportunities they get in and they invest because it's a diversified portfolio, it's risk balanced, phenomenal team. And once they start digging into the due diligence, they can see, look, if 1 or 2 of these is successful, it's a huge, huge upside for them. So what I do want to focus on, though, is in terms of use of funds, you'll see this cluster in the upper right-hand quadrant, where we'll have several clinical studies completed and several more on the way. And then the lead optimization of, we just note target number 5 here, but we have target 5, 6, 7, and 8, which have been successfully screened by way of the DNA encoded library collaboration with XChem. Those are on the bench right now, pending resources. We're very disciplined about prioritizing our work as a pipeline company, but those 2 will be up and elevated where appropriate. So you start to see what the landscape will look like a couple years from now, and Psy will have a very robust and increasingly validated opportunity to significantly influence care in the CNS area, which should translate to substantial increase in the value of the company. So with that said, the summary then is we have a world-class team, and as Alan mentioned, and as did I, these are working people, which makes it extremely exciting. So and beneficial to our patients and our programs. The markets are large, very familiar to many of you on the line. I don't know too many people who aren't affected directly or indirectly by way of mental health challenges. We're pursuing meeting those needs by way of an innovative R&D approach, which enhances productivity, which Alan had noted is not only efficient, more efficient and effective, the effectiveness as defined by superior molecules. This isn't a game at the margin where we hope to add just a little bit of extra value. We want to fundamentally change the value proposition for each of these compounds. And we have intentionally a robust, focused, and risk-balanced pipeline driving value creating milestones, again, in the immediate term and certainly through as far as you can see, and several options and the experience to know, when and how to optimize our assets. So with that, I really want to say thank you for listening, and we invite you to join our compelling mission to meaningfully improve the medicines that treat and significantly improve the lives of not only patients, but as many of us know, the lives of patients and their family members, and extending beyond that, society at large. So I would like to now turn the program back to Lindsay, and we're happy to field questions.
Thank you, David and Alan. Great job. Yes, to our attendees, moving into Q&A. So this is a great time to ask any questions that you have. So I'm going to dive right in because some questions have pulled through already, and I want to be mindful of everyone's time today. So first question, gentlemen, let's see. If it is an early stage, what does the diagnostic path look like? Essentially, it would require an early diagnosis. No question mark? That's from Carl.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we would, I think, certainly be looking at the impact of some of those biomarkers I talked about to give us an early diagnosis. And it may well be that as our knowledge increases, genetics will also play a role there. We know that there are some very clear genetically defined risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. That would also help, and the goal would be to really, start treatment as early as possible. Given, with those diagnostic tools, we can be confident of the diagnosis. Obviously, there are some ethical issues there, but that's certainly a goal of the field.
Great, thanks, Alan. Next question: approximately when do you anticipate trials in humans?
Do you want to take that, Dave?
Yeah, well, we're going to be initiating, for example, our first core program will be initiating IND enabling studies in the next 3 to 5, 6 months at the most. And then those typically run 12 months. So at that point, we'll initiate the first phase 1. We plan to do some dose escalation studies and also safety studies, and also some PET imaging studies. So that would be the earliest. And the others aren't far behind. The one for Parkinson's, and which could also potentially be used for depression, is a close follower. And so
great, thanks, David.
And the tau would be probably a couple of years from now.
Perfect. And I hope that answers your question. If you have anything else, please go ahead and send it on over. Next question: what are your expectations regarding the early diagnosis of AD? Are you confident progress will be made in the next 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, so I mean, I've talked a little bit about this in the previous question, but I think one of the really interesting developments in this area has been how industry, academia, government, NIH have all been able to work together on these biomarker studies. A huge initiative around that, which is ongoing. So I'm confident that work will develop new biomarkers. The impact of that initiative has been tremendous. So I think we will see clearly, development not just of imaging, but blood biomarkers, and as I said, maybe genetics as well, that will give us an early diagnosis.
Fantastic. Next question. Can you give us kind of a little bit of more detail on the business model and how Psy would be profiting? What would be the go-to market distribution strategy, and who is the customer?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. And having, taken products from whiteboard all the way through to commercialization, it's really going to be, and this isn't a dodge, but it's the answer. It's going to depend on who the audience is. And along the way, invariably we're going to partner some of these assets, and we also would like to keep some of those. Keeping them to build a fully integrated company is a very viable option for us. So depending on the product, depending on the target audience, patient population, that will define the go-to market strategy. But if we take something like Alan mentioned, the tauopathy, an orphan indication, you can get very close, and I have a lot of experience in this area, get very close to the patients, their families, their caregivers, and have a really fully integrated care service for those types of patients. We would, if we decided to keep one of those opportunities, we would deploy that type of strategy.
Perfect. And then kind of flowing to the next question a little bit, how do you intend to seek any, or do you intend to seek any corporate partners?
We do, and let's give an example. Our lead program 05, which is the subject of the $8 million grant submission, which we also intend to do work on our own through equity. This is one where we'll continue to invest in that program and create and achieve value creating milestones. And at some point down the line, we may partner that with a company that is really focused and expert and accomplished in the area of pain. That we're in psychiatric disorders. So that would be one potential model. The other, as Alan mentioned, which could be a really interesting decision down the road. For $500,000, we're going to be able to determine through the preclinical proof of concept for tau, the risk profile of this asset and its potential. So we have two main things to consider. One is to keep it and continue on the pathway, either to build more value before seeking a partner or deciding right out of the gate, let's seek a partner here. That would take our focus back to exclusively psychiatric disorders, and the dementia piece would not be a part of it. But not to overcomplicate the answer, we also may have the option, because in our targets 5 through 8, we may have opportunities that are complementary to a tau program in the dementia space. So one may think, okay, we could possibly bundle that into a dementia-related spin-out. So these are all options that are on the table. One thing I can say is we're not actively seeking partners at the moment. We intend to keep these assets and build significant value over time, fully understanding at each investment point the risk that we would be incurring for that next study and also the potential value creation.
Great, thanks, David. Probably going to have time for one more question here, and if there's questions that we didn't get to, we will make sure that we follow up with everyone to get all those questions answered. David and Alan, can you give us a little bit of background on what your financial strategy is going to be beyond Series A?
Yeah, if you reflect back on that last slide, which noted where we'll be with the use of funds, or we expect to be with the use of funds, we would have a very robust clinically based platform to consider things such as a significantly up value Series B. And we've also had outreaches to us with respect to the possibility at that point to consider a crossover, which would be a fairly rapid tenure in the Series B timeframe, and then flip that into an IPO. And having done public companies before, taking companies public and being a senior executive within public companies, this is not daunting. It can happen. So it's a really good question, because it suggests, and people are already doing this, looking at trajectory comps, especially in the CNS space. Where could these guys go and at what point? And given the robustness of our pipeline, that we're not a 1 or 2 product company of high risk nature, highest risk nature, this is what the kind of discussions we're having with folks that are not necessarily involved in the Series A, but will be in the next couple steps. The other final thing I'll say about the financing strategy is we have this intentional non-dilutive financing approach. So we have machinery already in place, which is doing very excellent job in designing grants. So, you know, we haven't even, to the extent we are awarded grants, that will be part of that financing strategy.
Great. And David, can you clarify what valuation you are raising this 30 million in? What round? Is that the A round as well?
Yeah, the 30 million is the A round, and the target valuation pre-money is 35 million. And in our discussions thus far, because we have ample comps, we're just not pulling a number out of the air. And so if we're to have, you know, nobody's pushed back on it given the comps. Pricing decisions, you know, negotiations are always going to take place one way or another. They could go up, they could go down. But we want to have a rational, logical discussion based on comps out there and how they may compare to us or not. So that's pretty much holding the line, and that's informed the raise to which we increased to 30 million based on the input we're getting from major firms from our originally targeted 20 million Series A. So we're keeping it below the 50%.
Great, thank you, David. We only have time, we have about 2 more minutes left, so I just wanted to, again, thank everyone for joining us and see if there's any final thoughts from you, David or Alan, before we sign off for the day.
No, we're just, again, honored to be here and really appreciate everybody's interest on the line. And for those who listen later, we also appreciate that. Please give us a call if you'd like to delve into the Psy opportunity at a deeper level. We have data room, we have everything set up for your diligence, and we again really do appreciate your interest and consideration.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us again. It was a lovely presentation on Psy. To all of our attendees, I will be following up with everyone individually, so if there's any additional questions, I will get you in direct contact with David or Alan. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you, Fawn.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.